Hey there, Legal Pagers. Welcome to this episode of the Legal Page podcast. Today's episode, I am chatting with Casey Handy Smith, who is an entertainment and digital media attorney specializing in contract negotiation for influencers and creatives. Now, over the past 6 years, Casey has helped clients navigate the legal side of building sustainable and scalable businesses that brands can't wait to work with. Casey is also the founder of Contracts by Casey, where she offers contract templates that provide clarity and business confidence for creative entrepreneurs. And you guys, Casey does very similar things to what I do with the Legal Page, but specifically her virtual law firm works in this entertainment influencer, space and world. And I couldn't wait to chat with her. You guys get 2 attorneys on this episode to talk with and chat through, and you're going to be flies on the wall as we go through influencer marketing and brand deals and contracts and things to look out for if you're getting into this space. So without further ado, you guys, let's just get into this. You're listening to the Legal Page podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As I mentioned in our intro, I am so excited to have Casey on the podcast to discuss all things about influencers and brands, you guys, and what exactly you need to know about influencer contracts and legalities. Casey, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, and I am really excited for you to be here because I know that this is definitely your niche and neck of the woods in the legal realm of things. With Casey being an attorney as well, we do, kind of similar things, but this is exactly what she focuses in on. Casey, I know you decently well, and I would love it if you could introduce yourself to everyone tuning in today.
Yeah, so my name is Casey Handy Smith, and I'm an entertainment and digital media attorney, which means that I deal with a lot of general business and intellectual property issues. And I help influencers and creative entrepreneurs who struggle with navigating the legal aspects of their growing businesses and brands. So in my law firm, I help influencers with negotiating brand deals. I work with other creatives like musicians in negotiating contracts. And I help my clients with getting custom contracts in place for their own kind of internal business operations as well. And I do a lot of licensing types of contracts. So if you're looking to utilize your content in the digital space and letting other folks use your content, get into a lot of that as well. And so outside of my law firm, I also offer legal resources like contract templates and digital products that really help creative entrepreneurs with getting that clarity around the legal aspects of their businesses so that they can really spend more time focusing on the things that they love doing, like creating, and less time worried about, what contracts do I need? How does this work with IP? And so those resources are available as a DIY approach to help creative entrepreneurs really get that stuff in place the way that they need to.
Oh, I love it. And where are you based out of?
I am based in Houston, Texas.
Nice. You guys, Casey and I were just talking about beforehand, like where, all of us virtual attorneys are all over the US and it's super awesome. Just this digital age of lawyering and obviously virtual law firms. That's what Casey does as well, similar to myself. And then we both have like the DIY, template contract way to go about it as well for, people who are just starting out or may not have the budget to work one-on-one with an attorney. So you guys, Casey gave you a very good list of the things that she really focuses in on and specializes through her digital law firm. And I know I shoot a bunch of people over to her when they're in the influencer world in particular, because as Casey, you probably know, and many people know that are tuning in, I am more in like the wedding and event industry world.
Mm-hmm.
Based upon, me being a photographer and getting into it. And so I know that I've had a lot of either photographers, or wedding vendors that are growing a following, and they're getting to it'd be interesting to hear your side of this too. I'm seeing like 20,000, 30,000 followers on Instagram. And that's kind of where they start their wheels start turning with influencer marketing and becoming an influencer, or brands are reaching out. Where do you kind of see it happening the most when people start thinking about the possibility of doing this?
Yeah, so I think it happens in a variety of ways because a lot of clients I've worked with, and really how I kind of initially started in the influencer space several years ago, was just having clients who were bloggers and online business owners
Mm,
who started to see it as just a viable way of making additional revenue within their business. So, they actually create their own strategies in terms of like how to reach out to brands. Now, granted, they already had nice size followings and things like that. So it was much easier to secure brand deals when they did start pitching. And so that's kind of one way, is that, you have these folks who are online entrepreneurs and who already kind of know and understand the value of the communities that they've created. And so they take the strategy and the approach of just making it an additional revenue stream within their business. Now, in
mhm.
terms of like when, I guess, kind of what you're referring to, I guess brands kind of looking at influencers or reaching out to influencers, follower count is obviously a part of that. But now you're starting to see more like micro influencers where you can have even less than 20,000 followers if you're in a particular niche. And so I think that's another big way you kind of see it. If you're really niche down into a particular space and you have a really engaged community, even if you only have, you know, 5,000, 8,000 followers, you can still be getting brand deals out here. So I think there's a lot of kind of factors that brands look at, and that, influencers kind of get their wheels turning as well, because, the follower count is a part of it, but it's, brands are looking more so for your engagement now, as opposed to just how many followers or how big your audience is.
Right. That makes total sense. Especially with micro influencers. I know people talk about that quite a bit at different conferences and events that I've gone to, and how important it is, just to go back to square one with engagement on Instagram. And that means so much more to brands than, just the follower account. Obviously, people with larger followings are just naturally going to have more people watching them, even when the percentage is down, to 2 to 3% engagement, or, you know, average viewers on Insta stories or something of the like. But yeah, interesting. Okay. So, regardless of how you get into it, okay? So if brands are reaching out to you, or if you're an influencer, like a blogger online that you were talking about, for many of your past clients, I'm guessing, have gotten into the influencer space. If you do put yourself out there as an influencer and maybe you're starting to make money by promoting brands, what are some key legal things to just consider when you're moving forward? Like just the first few things that you need to think about in your mind.
Yeah, so one of the first things you definitely want to think about is making sure you are properly disclosing your relationships with brands. So even say you haven't had a brand deal at all yet, and it's something that you're just looking to do, you definitely need to get familiar with the FTC's endorsement guidelines, because a lot of influencers, it's one of those things people just kind of don't know, so they don't do. But this information is readily available. And there are so many instances now that we've been able to see where influencers have really been getting hit for not doing these proper disclosures. So that would be, I would say, one of the first things is making sure you understand what it really means to post sponsored content for brands, and making sure that you're able to do that while still maintaining that authenticity with your own audience. And then also looking to, when a brand does approach you, or if you're in negotiations with a brand, asking them, if they have a list of kind of approved
Mm.
sponsored hashtags and things like that. Because a lot of brands, especially a lot of the bigger brands, they'll actually have that in the contract for you, so that, make sure you're reading that. Of course, make sure you always read your contracts and that you're aware of those terms, so that you're not only following the FTC guidelines, but so you're also not breaching your contracts with your brands by making sure you're doing those proper disclosures. So that would be one thing. And then I would say another thing is just really start understanding and learning the industry so that you can know what to look for in your brand deals and know what parts of the contract are really going to be negotiable and what things are a bit more standard. So those would be kind of the couple of things I would say start with. You know, if you're new to the space or you're thinking about it, get familiar with those FTC guidelines, and then also just do your research generally on influencer marketing, because there's a lot of stuff out there now that was not available, I would say 5-6 years ago, when a lot of my clients were first starting into the space. So
yeah, it was like a free for all back in those days.
Yeah.
People, you had no idea what they were doing. They're like, I guess I'll hashtag ad, hashtag sponsored. I'm not quite sure. So I know, correct me if I'm wrong, people can just Google those FTC guidelines. I mean, I know where to find them, but if someone's just starting out and they like don't have the ability to just go talk with an attorney right away, they can find those online, correct?
They can, yeah. You can go to ftc.gov and search endorsement guidelines. You can Google FTC endorsement guidelines. Just make sure that it's coming from that website. So the ftc.gov is the website you want to make sure it's coming from. And then there are other kind of just resources out there that break it down, you know, in layman's terms for you. But I think the FTC does a good job. So yeah, ftc.gov is where you want to go.
Perfect. Now, contracts. Let's just dive into this a little bit, and I might have some follow-up questions for you based upon what you say. Brand contracts. So that's when a brand gives you as the influencer their contract. I'm guessing that is the most common, but do you need to have your own influencer agreement perhaps as well for maybe brands that don't have a brand agreement, or do most of them always do? How does that work?
That's a really great question. And it's funny because there actually are a lot of instances where brands don't have contracts, especially if you're working with kind of smaller brands who are just starting to utilize influencers, or even some mid-sized brands. Like, you would really be surprised, Paige, like at some of the companies that do not have contracts in place.
It's surprising, but maybe not so surprising. Every day we're like, wait, you don't have a contract? Weird.
Exactly. Like, yeah. So it's good practice, in my opinion, to have your own contract already in place, so that if you do end up in a situation where the brand doesn't have a contract, you already have the paperwork and you're ready to go. And I think by going that approach as well, you have a much better understanding of what you're getting into because it's your contract. And you will be surprised at how many brands will actually accept your contract and not push back on that. So, you know, of course, there'll be some negotiations in there, but I think it's definitely good practice to have that. And I know a lot of influencers who work with bigger brands and still present their contracts, and bigger brands will take their contracts as well. So I think it's good practice to have that in place if you are serious about, you know, being an influencer and making it a viable business for yourself.
Where would they get said influencer agreements? Do you have one? Do you suggest that people make them a little more custom instead of, you know, just a one size fits all? Because I'm guessing influencers do things a bit differently.
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing, you know, and I tell people this all the time, you know, as you know, Paige, contract templates are not created equal. So you definitely don't want to just be grabbing a standard like service contract that you find online somewhere and start trying to apply it to your influencer services and whatnot. And so, yeah, I do have a influencer contract template in my template store specifically for the influencer marketing industry. And so it has everything in there that relates to, you know, the FTC guidelines, that relates to exclusivity and usage and all of those things that are specific to the influencer marketing industry. And in terms of kind of customizing it for your needs, with my templates, all of them come with implementation videos where I literally walk through what all the clauses and provisions mean. Because, you know, when I was first starting my template store, I would hear so many folks come to me. People would come to me like, well, I bought this template, but I have no idea what it really means. And so now I still need help in trying to implement it. So yeah, so you'll have that, you know, that information there for you. So, you know, how to edit it and customize it for your needs, to really be able to move forward. So yes, I do have that template available. And the biggest advice, again, is just to use something that is specific to what you're doing and not just try to take some random contract and make it work.
Yeah, please don't go get a master service agreement from
Yeah.
somewhere. That's just like
Don't
boilerplate
do
language. You know, what Casey's talking about, you guys, is also, you know, I'm thinking from my perspective, if I were just to get into, like, I'm putting myself in the shoes of an newbie influencer, you are probably going to be presented with some contracts that are very, very legalese heavy, which means it's a lot of mumbo jumbo. It's hard to read through. It's coming from corporate, from the brands that are presenting it to you. And you know, when you have an agreement like Casey's, and we'll make sure to link it in the show notes and push that out for all of you interested in, you know, getting into influencer world and marketing. When you have that in your legal toolkit, you're able to see how specific Casey has made certain clauses to protect you as an influencer. That's why this type of, you know, very specific niche contract is out there. And like Casey said, all contracts are not created equal. They are very specific to the need that the contract serves. And when you have this type of influencer agreement, even if you're not using it to give to the brands and they have one to give to you, you know what needs to be in that bigger brand corporate contract that's coming through because you already have it in your influencer agreement. So I would, you know, probably argue here, Casey, and I'm sure you would as well, that that's just helpful for your education and knowledge when going into, you know, brand negotiation, deals and things like that, to have a contract that is protecting you because it's your contract.
Mm-hmm. And that is written in a way that's not super legalese. Because with my templates, and I'm sure you do the same thing with yours, Paige, I try my best to put them in as much plain English as possible so that people can actually understand what's going on.
Oh, yeah. I talk about legalese all the time on this podcast, and people know this if you have, you know, any of my templates as well. I write it differently, quote unquote, than like what you would expect to see, because, you know, Casey and I are from this, I would say, new wave, new generation. It's been like now at least 20 years of kind of plain English writing and learning in law school. And, you know, that trajectory is getting all the way across the legal world in terms of court documents and, you know, judges writing very similarly with plain English standards. But when you get like corporate contracts, for some reason, they're still very legalese heavy and very confusing, which is definitely when you want to get a lawyer involved, because we're still trained to be able to read those a lot better than you are. So speaking of that, what can you maybe give everyone like 2 to 3 things that they should look for in a brand contract that, you know, comes across their desk?
Yeah. So a few things that you definitely want to look for. One of the big things is exclusivity. So if you're starting to research the influencer marketing industry, you've probably seen this term come up a bit. And it's actually a pretty standard type of language for like any sort of talent sort of agreement. And that's just a kind of a side note caveat, you know, influencer marketing space. When you are getting these bigger brand deals, a lot of them are written like traditional talent contracts, which is what can make them even more kind of confusing for influencers because they're kind of taking like hodgepodge, you know, older way of doing things contracts and applying them to new situations. But that's on another note. And so exclusivity basically just deals with, you know, what brands you can work with during a particular time frame within the contract. And so the reason why exclusivity is so important is because you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into working with a particular brand for a time frame that's going to then interfere with other contracts that you can get with other brands. And in that same light of exclusivity, another key clause you want to look for is whether or not they actually list out what those competitive products and brands are. I see a lot of influencers who struggle with this because they may be working, you know, with one brand who's in, I don't know, let's just say the shoe industry. And then they get another sponsorship with a company that's in clothing, does some shoes, but not only shoes. And then there becomes a lot of gray area in terms of, can I work with that particular brand? Is this going to breach my exclusivity provision within my contract? And so one thing I always like to make sure that brands list out is, what brands and what products do you actually consider to be competitive, so that you can know what other deals that you can work on within that same time period. And I would say another thing to be on the lookout for in brand deals is, there's so many, but
just a couple, we're not going to overwhelm everyone, but yes, these two that you just talked about too, I have heard many people have issues with.
Yeah. I mean, because some exclusivity periods can become really excessive. And so you definitely want to get them within a reasonable time frame as much as possible. But I would say one other thing to just highlight here would be like brand approval. So every brand, for the most part, is going to have it where their approval is required of any content that you create before it goes out. And, this is their way, of ensuring that, the content is on point for what they have in mind, making sure that it's in alignment with their overall brand. And so just making sure that there are guidelines for, how that approval is given, making sure that it's a good faith approval, kind of limiting the amount of possible reshoots and things that have to be done, because that's one of the biggest issues that influencers can face when you deal with a brand approval situation. If they don't like it, then that means they can have you go redo everything.
And so, hours and hours of your time. Mm-hmm.
Hours and hours of your time. And so making sure that if that does happen, that there is room to negotiate additional fees for that, if that's the case, and just kind of limiting the amount of like reshoots and things like that. So yeah, I would say exclusivity is a big one. Brand approval is big. And then those competitive products and brands.
Perfect. That's all very helpful. I've helped a couple fitness people online, and that exclusivity was huge for them, especially with, promoting like a protein powder or, some type of like fitness supplement along those lines, and how if it's not listed out, like how exclusive you have to be towards these companies. I mean, just imagine if you're like in the fitness world, that's basically all that you promote. Mm-hmm. And so if you get yourself, and like you said, pigeonhole down into a contract that now you're trying to get out of because they want you only with them for like 12 months. This was an instance that I had with a past client. She couldn't do anything. Yeah. It was 12 months of, I promoted these people and now I'm not obligated to promote them anymore, but I can't promote anybody else. And so, that type of influencer could lose out on thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of promoting and working with other brands during that time. This episode of the Legal Paige podcast is sponsored by the Legal Paige Contract Shop. Need a new clause to add into your existing contract to protect yourself? In a new specific situation, the TLP Shop has you covered. Just go to thelegalpageshop.com to check out all our contracts, clauses, and bundles for your online small business. That's thelegalpageshop.com. Time frame wise, I'd be interested to hear from you. I'm not sure if you can say this or not. 12 months seem pretty excessive to me in terms of influencer life, because things are like so rapid and changing. Would you say monthly, 3-month periods are pretty normal? What do you see most often from brands?
So what I see most often is usually like a month.
Yeah, that's what I was
exclusivity periods. And I have clients who kind of have their standard exclusivity windows where they'll do like a week or 2 weeks post from the date of posting.
Gotcha.
And so that's definitely something you can kind of establish yourself as an influencer, like what your kind of standard windows are that you allow. But yeah, more commonly I see more like a month, sometimes even just a few weeks. Maybe 2 months, but yeah, certainly not 12.
Yeah, I know. You probably heard that number and you're like, what? And again, you guys, this is why I'm having this type of podcast episode, because you just don't know what you don't know. If you're like getting into it and you're new, you feel like you don't have negotiation power, but you do as an influencer in these situations. And they will if you don't have a contract like Casey has, her own influencer agreement that you can have and give to them, that's your set standards and what you're comfortable with. If you don't have those type of things, then you're kind of just blindly getting these brand agreements, like I said, across your desk, and you're so excited about the number, like $20,000 to promote X. And you're like, yes, sign on the dotted line. And then you don't read the fine print, or you don't have an attorney to help you go through it. Then you could get in those sticky situations that, of course, Casey and I want to help you avoid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So that's good to know. Yeah. A month, actually, now that I think about it too, seems a bit excessive. I could see most influencers online, and lots of them that I follow too, you're going to have the brand want some type of time frame after you post, to not post similar products or similar things, or to even not post another branded story. I know that that's a big thing with influencer agreements too. Like, you have the 2-day window so that it doesn't dilute that promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go from the other side of things. I don't know if you've done this. Influencers are protecting themselves when it comes to brand deals and working with others. But what would you suggest for brands to protect themselves when working with influencers?
That's a good one. I have worked with brands, some in the space. I definitely work with influencers and their reps a lot more than brands. But in terms of what brands can do to protect themselves, I've definitely seen situations where people will say they'll give influencers products, and then the influencer never posts about it. So they've just given away this free product.
Yes.
So something that I would definitely say with that, number one, have a contract, because those situations I've seen that happen, they did not have contracts with the influencers.
Yeah, they're just dropping in people's DMs.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, what's your address?
Exactly. So don't do that. Definitely don't do that. So have a contract in place, and then have things also that kind of safeguard if you are giving someone an influencer product to promote, making sure there's clear language as to, if they don't promote within a certain time frame, that they're going to be responsible for the cost of those products. So that's just kind of some ways to make sure you have that language in your contracts. And I'm thinking, in terms from a brand perspective, for the brands, it's really definitely making sure you have contracts in place, because you never can really control how an influencer is going to act. Because even if you aren't giving them product, influencers are their own brands. Like, influencer, you're your own business. And so they can't really dictate how you're going to operate once, the partnership has started. So I would say for brands, just making sure you have those contracts in place, making sure you're splitting up payments the way you need to, so that you're not out too much if things don't go as planned. But yeah, that's kind of the main things I have just off the top of my head.
Yeah. And, as you were talking there too, I'm just thinking people who might be listening in that are brick and mortars that are trying to, work with influencer marketing a little bit to get their products or, baked goods out there or something along those lines. Cause I see this happening all the time. I mean, I've probably had in the past month, 10 to 15 different pop in my DMs, what's your address? Can I send you something? And I find it so interesting because, one, I'm like, you guys know I'm an attorney, right? This is kind of a weird way to ask me to do this. Maybe give me a contract and I'm going to totally think you're hella professional. But that's just the way that the online world is working right now. People aren't doing, print ads anymore. They're either trying to, spread out versus, Facebook ad spend versus influencer marketing spend. So yeah, things to consider as brands. I was going to add in, I think you have to also be very specific as a brand, what you want, how many stories, is it a story? Is it a post? Could you give us a little information on what the expectant cost? I know it depends on followers and engagement and all of that. But from my understanding, posts are more expensive than stories because it's a living thing on your feed. But obviously stories, do they come in packages? You do 5 stories about this brand, at least or at least, at least 5, or do they only have to do 1? Those things need to be in your brand contract as well. But what is like the most common thing you see for people just starting out that are working with like one brand, you've never posted them before? What do you commonly see in these type of contracts for, the amount of things you're supposed to post or where you're supposed to post?
Yeah, so typically I see it where it's all packaged together. So there's no separated cost or breakdown for like price for a story versus a feed post versus a live or something like that. It's all like, okay, you're going to do a feed post with 3 carousel photos. You're going to do 5 frames in your IG stories. This is what the frames need to include. This is how long they need to be. So it's typically a mixture of like story frames and then however many usually it's like 1 or 2 actual feed posts, but then they always, for whatever reason, like the carousel post as well.
Oh, so that's interesting. Always, I know when you said that.
Yeah. And so that's usually outlined in the contract as well, like how many, of those you need to do. And then there's a price for all of that collectively. So I've not ever seen it broken down as different prices for different sorts of things. But I'm sure that there is, from the brand side, a different value consideration for, what they're going to pay an influencer based on stories versus feed.
Yeah. Okay. That's great to know, especially for people that are thinking about this. It's like a package deal, one price, and you do all of the above, usually in like a certain time frame as well. So they kind of go hand in hand. And I'm sure the brands behind this are doing market research on what's working well, what's not working well. Just quickly, I'm interested to ask you, have you seen brands asking for influencers to do reels at all?
Not yet. I haven't seen reels yet. I'm sure that it's going to be happening soon because obviously TikTok is already a thing that brands have been asking for. So, here come reels. So yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm certain they'll be here very soon.
Yeah, me too. I'm thinking that's going to be a part of the package now as well. Okay. Turning to, I guess, basically since March with COVID happening and a lot of social change happening in our world, I would love to hear your thoughts on influencers online and how they can potentially negotiate with brands when things happen that impact the online space, like the BLM movement and things that really it was more important to obviously post about that and not do branded posts at that period of time. Did you, and even with COVID, like when it's still such an issue for people and they need to talk about it, I know there's been a lot of like silencing and people feeling, they don't know how to talk about things. They don't know when to talk about things and the right way to talk about things. For influencers specifically that maybe have to do something because they're under contract with a brand, did you experience anything with working with clients during that period in terms of negotiating that to a different, time and space that was more appropriate?
So the more common thing that I personally experienced was campaigns just being canceled. Like I had a lot of clients who unfortunately lost a lot of campaigns because
the brands canceled.
The brands canceled, because they were talking about things and that just weren't gonna fit into the marketplace for all the reasons that you said. No one cares about you marketing this cool car when we can't go anywhere. And then now we have social unrest, like no one wants to see that on their feed. Mm-hmm. So I experienced that more where stuff being canceled. Now things are coming back into fold because brands have been able to find ways to kind of still get their things in front of audiences while being mindful of the things that are going on in the world right now. Mm-hmm. So it's more so, tapping into that authenticity and then being clear about just being sensitive to the various things that are going on in the world. But the beauty is, with influencer marketing, and we talked about this kind of earlier, just being like in a virtual space in general, is that you really can still operate. There's nothing to stop you from posting. So the beauty is that as a whole, things have been able to kind of carry on, but it's more so just been a shift of, what are we going to be promoting? What is this campaign? How is the messaging and all of that going to look now that we have all this stuff going on? And so there's definitely been a push for, different types of products that are more like in-home based things, because people are doing a lot more gardening right now and home improvement things. And so there's been a shift there in terms of having influencers market those sorts of things. And I can't remember your original question, but I was just going to add, so if you are an influencer who's looking to get in this space now, I would say if you are in a space where you deal with any sort of like home improvement and things like that, then that's definitely a great space to be in right now.
Oh my gosh, yes. Seriously. I have seen so many good influencers in like the DIY world just popping up like crazy and promoting things, and it's working and it's so natural. That's what brands want, is they want it to feel easy and natural and not, promotion spammy, turning people off when they're following on stories or you're posting about it or something along those lines. I mean, the economics of home improvement have been mind-boggling and staggering in terms of the billions of dollars that are getting funneled into it the past few months because we're all home. And I think too, like parenting things are becoming, more and more prevalent in the influencer world because many, families are at home with kids at the, during these times. So yeah, very interesting. And just like home things like vacuums you see all the time, or like fitness things at home versus like going out to different, fitness centers and things like that. Interesting. And yeah, one other thing I was going to add when you were talking about that at the beginning of your answer was this postpone, don't cancel culture. You know that's a thing in the wedding and event industry. I'm sure you've heard of this, right? So it kind of goes along the lines of what maybe brands were trying to do with influencers. Like, we're just going to cancel this campaign. And I'm sure you were negotiating with a lot of your influencer clients, like, well, you guys signed a contract too. Like, you can't just cancel because, this is all my income as well. We could postpone it to a more appropriate time to talk about it, or let's just change up what you like, the way I'm promoting this or how I'm promoting this. Let's put our heads together versus just canceling and not paying me. I'm sure that had something for you to do as well during these crazy times.
And that's the thing with influencer contracts in terms of like how people get paid and stuff. It can vary so much, like where you get paid in the trajectory of the campaign project, because, for some influencers, it might be you receive some payment up front before you even start. And even in those instances, it's usually not like an immediate when you sign the contract. Especially when you're dealing with these bigger companies, a lot of them have things like net 90 or, net 30, which means that you get paid 30 days after the content goes out. So in a lot of the situations, even whether you're canceling or postponing, there hasn't been an actual exchange of value yet. And so there's not as much, I guess, love lost as would be like in a wedding setting or something like that, because, content hasn't been created yet. No payments have gone out yet. And that's just kind of another thing to look out for too in your contracts. We talked about that earlier, but definitely take a look at that net 90 language they love to throw in, try to get that lessened as much as possible. And if you can negotiate getting some sort of payment up front, if you know that you're going to have expenses like having to hire a photographer or props or clothing or anything like that, try to negotiate getting some money up front as well.
Yeah. And also just planning out your months. If you're working with like 5 brands one month and 5 brands the next month, and you could have probably had a brand that you worked with, say, if they do like some net 30, net 90 situation and you don't get paid anything up front and then you lose them as, a brand promotion and income to your business as an influencer, you could have potentially had someone that would have at least paid you something to begin with. Yeah. So you don't lose all of that cash flow during the month. Interesting. I'm very cued into this. I find this fascinating. I hope all of you do too, listening in. I'm sure Casey and I could go on and on about everything. There's lots of, contractual things. I would say, everyone just make sure that when you're in this world, you do have the power of negotiation. There's 2 sides at the table. if you need legal help, it's definitely beneficial to get a lawyer on hand like Casey that knows this world, that can help you navigate brand contracts more easily. Casey, what's like one last big tip that you would tell people, influencers or baby influencers or people who are starting to get into this should be aware of before we close out here?
Oh man, one big tip, parting words. I would honestly say do your homework. Like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, there's a lot more resources out there now that have information on how influencer marketing industry works, that give you insight on what brands are looking for, that gives you some clarity around brand deals and things you should negotiate, like the things we talked about in this episode today. So I would say starting point is do your homework and definitely get a mentor who is already doing what you're doing, because that is definitely one of the quickest ways to know, if you have a friend who's already getting brand deals and you get a contract and you're like, hey, they want me to do 5 story frames and 3 in-feed posts. And then they only, they're going to pay me $2,000. Like, is this reasonable? Like, what should I be looking at? And so I would say doing your research on the industry is huge. And then getting yourself a mentor who is already doing what you're looking to do so that you can run these things by them if you're not, yet in a position where you can hire an attorney or someone to do these things on your behalf.
Gotcha. And you have a checklist, correct, that people could maybe start with?
I do have a checklist. Yeah, I have a free checklist. It's my influencer agreement checklist. It has the 10 key terms that should be in your influencer contracts. And there's other information within that checklist as well. So yeah, and I'll make sure I give you that link, Paige, so that you can send that out to your people.
Yes, we will share it, you guys, in the show notes. We'll make sure it's linked up every time we promote this episode because Casey told me about that beforehand. And I was like, yes, everybody needs to get their hands on this. Well, Casey, thank you so much for your time. I know it's incredibly valuable. I think this is going to be a very, very well listened to podcast, especially in today's day and age when influencer marketing is basically the way to go for ad spend. Where can people find you? Where do you like to hang out online if they do need to get in touch with you for one-on-one help?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at Contract Casey. So you guys can find me over there. Feel free to slide in my DMs. I chat with people there all the time. And my website, contractcasey.com, is how you can find me. Email is hello@contractcasey. So yeah, that's how you guys can reach out to me. I'm pretty much Contract Casey everywhere.
I love it. It's like the legal page. You have such a good name, Contract Casey. You guys look at that alliteration. She's killing it. Casey, thank you again so much. You've been a true joy to talk with. And I can't wait for everyone to hear all about this when they listen in.
Yes. Thank you so much again for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.